Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. Being overly trusting, naive, or gullible can sometimes be dangerous, at times even life-threatening. Yet we all have moments when we want to believe in miracles, when childhood dreams feel within reach, and our longing for something makes us ignore caution and common sense. Unfortunately, this vulnerability is exactly what criminals exploit. The tragic story of Elodie Morel, a young French woman in 2005, shocked the country not just because of its brutality, but also because of the cold indifference of people who chose silence and greed over her life. This is a story about how blind trust in promises of a fairy tale ending can lead to a nightmare. Who was Elodie Morel? Elodie Morel was born on February 18, 1976 in Marseille. From a young age, her angelic beauty was hard to miss. As she grew older, Elodie's striking looks drew attention, and many believed she was destined for the spotlight, whether on TV or in magazines. As a teenager, she became deeply passionate about becoming a model. However, her family, living a modest life, didn't take her dreams seriously. When her sports began in the 1990s, Elodie repeatedly sent her photos to modeling agencies, but never received any replies. After high school, she attended college, married her classmate Sean at 22, and became a mother by 25. At that point, it seemed like she had left her dream of modeling behind. By 2005, Elodie was 29 and working as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in Marseille. She still turned heads with her flawless figure and youthful appearance, often receiving compliments or envious looks. Though she no longer openly talked about modeling, the dream never truly left her heart. She believed her time had passed, but deep down, there was still a flicker of hope. In April 2005, she stumbled upon an online modeling application. Encouraged by her desire to revisit her dream, she filled it out, attached her best photos, and submitted it. To her surprise, she received a quick response. The offer seemed exciting, a chance to finally achieve what she had always wanted. But what Elodie didn't know was that the alluring promise from a so-called fashion photographer was nothing more than a cruel trap. What awaited her wasn't a glamorous career, but a slow, agonizing death. A devastating fate for someone who simply wanted to believe in her dreams. About 2 weeks after Elodie posted her profile online, she received an exciting offer. She was invited to be the new face of Rolls-Royce, the renowned English luxury car brand. The job promised $1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to seal the deal, she needed to meet the photographer for a test shoot. The meeting was scheduled for May 2nd, at a bar in the town of Aigues-Mortes. Elodie was thrilled and immediately shared the news with her husband, Sylvain. Although he was skeptical, he didn't argue with her decision. Early that morning, Elodie left her son with her parents and drove to the meeting spot, planning to stay in Aigues-Mortes for 3 days. She had already booked a hotel room. That evening, she called Sylvain to tell him she was heading to the bar and feeling a bit nervous. He wished her luck and asked her to call him as soon as she could. Tragically, that would be the last time he ever spoke to her. The last meeting. Elodie arrived at the bar as planned and sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she had been corresponding with via email. Instead, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s joined her at the table. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explaining that he had been sent to meet her and scout locations for the photo shoot the next day. Having no real experience in the modeling industry, Elodie didn't find this unusual and trusted him. The man appeared professional, spoke confidently, and seemed to know all the details of her previous emails with the photographer. Their conversation flowed naturally, focusing on Elodie's potential career. In her mind, she was already envisioning herself gracing the covers of magazines and imagining how she would spend her future earnings. By around 9 p.m., with darkness fully set in, the man suggested they go scout for the perfect location for the shoot. Aigues-Mortes, a charming medieval town, is known for its picturesque towers, fortresses, and chapels, Ideal spots for a stunning photo shoot. Still excited and completely unaware of the danger, Elodie agreed. She left the bar with the man and got into his car. She was never seen alive again. A chilling revelation. What's especially disturbing is that another man, who personally knew the perpetrator, later revealed chilling details about the crime. This marked the beginning of uncovering a horrific and senseless tragedy that would shake all who heard Elodie's story. That evening, May 2nd, a call came in to the Aigues-Mortes police station. A panicked man claimed that a young woman was in serious danger and something needed to be done immediately. He didn't know her name or exactly where she might have been taken, but he was certain there wasn't much time to act. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tasco, a nightclub owner and police informant. Dominique often provided inside information about criminal activities in the area. He explained that, earlier that night, he had seen a dangerous man he knew, Gom Mangat, at a bar. Mangat was deeply involved in the criminal underworld and had a reputation for being cruel and ruthless. The day before, Mangat had reportedly bragged about luring a naive pretty girl online. He claimed he planned to kidnap her and sell her to a brothel in Spain for a large sum of money. Dominique had tried to step in when he saw Mangat with the woman, but his efforts were ignored. Feeling helpless, he contacted the police, hoping they could act quickly. A race against time. Unfortunately, the police had no solid leads to act on immediately. They didn't know the victim's name, her location, or where she might have been taken. By the next morning, however, they received a missing person report from Elodie Morel's worried family. They explained that she had left home the previous day for a photo shoot in Aigues-Mortes and hadn't returned. Her phone was off and there had been no contact since. At first, the police didn't connect this disappearance to Dominique's warning. They suspected Elodie might have left willingly, possibly with a lover. However, her family insisted that she would never abandon her young son or disappear without telling anyone. It wasn't until May 5th, 3 days after she vanished, that investigators realized Elodie could be the same woman Dominique had tried to warn them about. A tragic timeline. Tragically, Elodie had been alive for 2 of the 3 days she was missing. She was held captive in a house in Aigues-Mortes where she was tortured and abused while her captors decided what to do with her. This delay in starting the search had cost precious time. Closing in on the suspects. On May 5th, the lead investigator questioned Dominique more formally about his tip. When shown a photo of Elodie, Dominique immediately confirmed she was the woman he had seen with Gom Mango 3 days earlier at the bar. When asked if he had any idea where Mango might be keeping her, Dominique mentioned rumors about an abandoned nightclub on the north side of town that Mango had recently been spotted near. Acting quickly, the police organized a stakeout at the location, hoping they weren't too late. That evening, police apprehended 48-year-old Gom Mangat and 53-year-old Richard Lingier as they arrived at the abandoned nightclub. While Mangat was the primary suspect, Lingier's role in the crime was unclear and required further investigation. During a search, officers found Elodie Morel's credit card in Mangat's pocket, leaving no doubt about his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were brought in for questioning, but Lingier was released after a few hours due to insufficient evidence. Lingier, who lived on the outskirts of town with his family, was friendly with Mangat but had no prior criminal record. Mango denied knowing Elodie, claiming he had simply stolen her credit card. According to his first version of events, he noticed an attractive, well-dressed woman at bar on May 2nd and assumed she had money. He claimed he sat down at her table, complimented her, and offered to buy her a coffee. Elodie, who mentioned she was waiting for someone, didn't ask him to leave. Mangat said they chatted briefly before he managed to swipe her credit card from her purse, which was hanging on the back of her chair, and left before she realized it was missing. Mangat admitted to using the stolen card the same day, withdrawing cash from an ATM on the if she hadn't told him. His story raised suspicions and lacked credibility. A background check revealed Mangat's extensive criminal history, including armed robbery, drug trafficking, and a brutal rape, for which he had served 9 years in prison. Despite his past convictions, Mangat hadn't reformed and had merely become more cautious to avoid getting caught again. The truth begins to unravel. The investigation took a sharp turn when police found Elodie's phone number saved in Mangut's contacts, as well as email exchanges between them regarding the supposed photo shoot. This evidence completely contradicted Mangut's initial claims and forced him to change his story. Mangut confessed that he had come across Elodie's modeling profile online and began messaging her, pretending to be a professional photographer. Using a fake female identity, he convinced Elodie that she was being considered for a lucrative opportunity. She was eager to trust him and agreed to meet without asking many questions, making her an easy target. The lies Mangut had spun to lure Elodie into his trap were starting to unravel, leaving investigators to piece together the horrifying truth. Mangut was nervous that Elodie might become suspicious when he showed up instead of the female photographer she had been communicating with. However, Elodie, trusting and eager for the opportunity, didn't find anything unusual. She agreed to scout photo shoot locations with him late at night and even got into his car without hesitation, a detail later confirmed by witnesses. Once they reached a secluded area, Mangut veered off the main road and stopped the car. Pulling out a gun, he demanded Elodie hand over her credit card. When she refused, he grabbed her purse and found the card himself. He then demanded the PIN, but Elodie still wouldn't give it to him. Furious, Mangut slammed her head against the dashboard and began choking her until she finally gave in and revealed the code. Afterward, he locked her in the trunk and drove to the nearest ATM to verify the PIN. It worked and he drained her account. With the money in hand, Mangut began contemplating his next move. What to do with the woman now trapped in his trunk? Hiding the victim and the role of the accomplice. Needing time to figure out his next steps, Mangut drove to his friend Richard Lingier's house. He told Lingier about the woman in his trunk and revealed his plan to sell her for a substantial profit, promising to share the money. Lingier and his wife had previously worked at the same nightclub, which had since shut down. After losing their jobs, they struggled financially and Lingier turned to heavy drinking. Desperate for money, he agreed to help Mangut. Both Richard and his wife were taken into custody, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When questioned about how Elodie's belongings ended up in their home, the couple admitted that Gom had brought them in exchange for letting him use their garage. They confessed to knowing that he was holding a woman there but chose not to intervene, as Gom had promised them a share of the profit. They also admitted to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope upon his request, claiming they didn't ask why. Forensic evidence and the third-story forensic analysis confirmed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. DNA found on the crumpled tissues matched Gom's, and saliva on the cigarette butts belonged to both Elodie and Gom. Elodie's family later revealed she had never smoked in her life due to severe asthma, which made the presence of her DNA on cigarette butts even more chilling. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Gom had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, during which she suffered unimaginable torment, only to find Elodie lifeless on the floor. According to Gom's latest version, she must have overdosed on the drugs he had given her. He claimed that he panicked and called Richard for help. Together, they decided to dispose of her body to avoid getting caught. Investigators debunk Gom's story. This new story raised further questions and inconsistencies. For one, the drug dosage found in the water bottle was far higher than what could be considered calming. It was clear the drugs were meant to incapacitate, not soothe. Additionally, Gom's claim that Elodie overdosed on her own contradicted earlier forensic evidence indicating that she had been strangled. The bruising patterns on her neck and other injuries showed clear signs of a violent assault. Furthermore, neighbors reported hearing muffled screams coming from the garage on the second night she was held captive, directly contradicting Gom's claim that she had been calm or unconscious. The timeline also didn't add up. By his own admission, he left Elodie alone for extended periods, which was inconsistent with his supposed concern for her not escaping. The final hours' forensic reconstruction and witness accounts pieced together a grim timeline. After 2 days of torture, Elodie likely tried to resist or escape, prompting Gom to use the rope found in the garage to strangle her. The presence of bloodstains and signs of a struggle indicated that her final moments were violent and terrifying. Once she was dead, Gom called Richard to help dispose of her body. It was later revealed that the two men transported her remains to a secluded area outside the town, under the cover of darkness. Despite an extensive search of the region, Elodie's body has never been recovered, as Gom and Richard both refused to reveal the exact location, and contradictory statements made pinpointing it impossible. Trial and sentencing. The evidence against Gom Mangat was overwhelming. Between the DNA, bloodstains, and witness testimonies, his guilt was indisputable. Richard Lingier, while less directly involved, was charged as an accomplice for providing the location and aiding in covering up the crime. In 2007, Gom was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping, torture, and murder. Richard received a 12-year sentence for his role in the crime. Richard's wife, who claimed she only knew bits and pieces of the situation, was convicted of withholding evidence and given a 3-year suspended sentence. Aftermath. Elodie's family was devastated by the loss and fought tirelessly to raise awareness about the dangers of online scams and meeting strangers. Her story became a cautionary tale for aspiring models and young women navigating the online world. To this day, her family continues to advocate for victims of violent crimes, keeping her memory alive. Gom Mangat attempted to appeal his sentence, claiming that the prosecution had manipulated evidence and that he was not solely responsible for Elodie Morel's death. His appeal was denied, as the court found the evidence against him to be overwhelming and consistent with the original verdict. Legacy of the case. The brutal murder of Elodie Morel sent shockwaves throughout the country, sparking widespread debates about the safety of online interactions and the responsibility of platforms hosting personal profiles. Her family launched a foundation in her name, advocating for increased awareness and education about online safety, particularly for young women. The investigation also highlighted critical flaws in law enforcement's handling of missing persons cases. The delay in linking Dominic Tasco's warning to Elodie's disappearance proved costly, as precious time that could have been used to locate her was lost. In response, police departments implemented new protocols for evaluating and responding to anonymous tips about potential abductions. Reflections on justice for Elodie's family. The verdicts brought a measure of closure, though the loss of their and mother remains an irreplaceable void. Gom Mangat continues to serve his life sentence, with little hope of parole given the heinous nature of his crimes. Richard Lingier and his wife, after serving their prison terms, faded into obscurity, their reputations irreparably damaged. The tragic story of Elodie Morel remains a somber reminder of the dangers lurking behind seemingly innocuous online interactions and the enduring importance of vigilance, both personal and systemic, in preventing such horrific crimes. Story 2. Back in 1982, in Breckenridge, Colorado, 2 women were murdered. Their bodies were found miles apart and 6 months apart, yet investigators believed both were killed on the same night by the same person. The one clue linking them? Pair of orange socks. On January 6, 1982, 29-year-old Bobby Jo Oberholzer left home at 7:15 a.m. Her day started like any other. She hitchhiked to work as usual. Bobby was married to Jeff Oberholzer, who ran an appliance repair business while she worked as a receptionist. They had been together for 4.5 years and lived in Alma, about 14 miles from where her body would later be found. That evening, at 6:20 p.m., Bobby called Jeff to let him know she was having drinks with friends after work. He asked if she wanted a ride, but she told him she'd find her own way home. Jeff made dinner and waited, but at some point he dozed off. When he woke up around midnight, Bobby still wasn't home. Worried, Jeff drove into Breckenridge to look for her. Her friends told him she had left the bar around 7:30 p.m. and assumed she had gotten a ride. When he reported her missing, the police told him it was too soon to file a report. Left with no choice, Jeff went back home and waited. The next morning, a farmer living 30 miles outside Breckenridge found Bobby's driver's license on his property. That same day, as Jeff and 2 friends were heading out to search for her, they spotted something unusual in a snow-covered field. Something blue. It was Bobby's backpack, which she never went anywhere without. Nearby, they found one of her gloves, stained with blood, along with several bloody tissues. Jeff and his friends quickly organized a search party. Just 2 hours later, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Bobby's lifeless body, more than 15 miles away from where they had found her backpack. She had been shot twice. Bobby Joe's house keys were found at the crime scene, along with 3 puzzling clues. First, the only footprints in the area belonged to her. Second, a plastic cord was tied around one of her wrists. And third, a single orange sock was lying nearby. That same day, another woman was reported missing, 21-year-old Annette Schnee. Annette worked as a cocktail waitress in Frisco, Colorado, and, like Bobby, often hitchhiked to and from work. Because of these similarities, police quickly linked both cases. Investigators questioned Jeff Oberholzer about Annette. At first, he denied knowing her, but after seeing her photo on the news, he admitted he had met her once. He explained that he had picked her up while she was hitchhiking and had given her his business card, but he insisted that he never saw or heard from her again. He also denied any involvement in either woman's death. 6 months after Annette disappeared, on July 3, 1982, her body was found just 13 miles from where Bobby's body had been discovered. What shocked police the most was that Annette was wearing the matching sock to the one found near Bobby. Even more suspiciously, Jeff's business card was found inside Annette's wallet. With this new discovery, Jeff quickly became the prime suspect. Authorities tried to piece together what might have happened on the night of January 6th. According to their timeline, Annette was last seen in Breckenridge around 4 p.m., having a serious conversation with an unidentified dark-hilled woman. Police believed that by 5 p.m. she had left to hitchhike home. At some point, the suspect picked her up and drove 20 miles south of Breckenridge, down a small dead-end road. There, he assaulted her inside his vehicle. While getting dressed afterward, she forgot to put on her second orange sock. She then tried to escape but was shot in the back as she ran. Police believe the killer then returned to Breckenridge and found his second victim, Bobby Joe Oberholzer. He picked her up and drove 10 miles south to a scenic overlook, where he attempted to assault her. Bobby managed to escape from his vehicle, and at that moment, the other orange sock fell out. The suspect chased after her, and when she turned away, he shot her twice, killing her. Investigators found it suspicious that Jeff knew both victims. To them, it seemed like more than just a coincidence. 2 months after Bobby Joe's murder, Jeff Oberholzer took a polygraph test and passed. From the beginning, he insisted he had an alibi. He claimed that on the night of the murders, he was at home with a friend who was visiting. For nearly 9 years, no one could track down this friend. Then, in December 1990, he was finally located and questioned. He confirmed that he had been at Jeff's house that night, but there was a problem. His timeline didn't match Jeff's. Despite the inconsistencies, Jeff never changed his story. He maintained his innocence and argued that Bobby wouldn't have accepted a ride from a stranger, especially when she had the option of him picking her up. For years, police assumed the blood found on Bobby's gloves and the tissues near her backpack belonged to her. However, in the early 1990s, DNA testing proved otherwise. The blood came from a man. More importantly, the tests confirmed it wasn't Jeff's. With this evidence, along with multiple witnesses backing his alibi, Jeff was officially cleared as a suspect. Investigators turned their attention to other possible suspects. One was Thomas Edward Luther, a cab driver with a violent past. Just 1 month after Bobby's murder, in February 1982, he picked up a hitchhiker in Breckenridge and brutally assaulted her. While in jail, he reportedly bragged about killing Bobby and Annette. His girlfriend also told police that he never came home that night. When questioned, he lied and claimed he was at work. Another suspect was Tracy Petrocelli, a convicted killer who murdered his fiancée in 1981 before going on a multi-state crime spree. At one point, he stayed at Annette's workplace, the Holiday Inn in Frisco. Despite both men having suspicious connections to the case, neither of their DNA matched the evidence found at the crime scene. Then, nearly 40 years later, there was a breakthrough. On February 24, 2021, police arrested 70-year-old Alan Lee Phillips and charged him with the murders of Bobby Joe Oberholzer and Annette Schnee. He also faced charges of kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon. He was denied bail. Investigators used genetic genealogy to match his DNA to the crime scene. Authorities now suspect he may have been involved in other crimes across Colorado. Tragically, Bobby's brother Kelly and her father Thomas passed away before they could see justice served and learn the truth about who took her life. Next, Gail Barris. On October 9, 1988, Gail Barris was last seen leaving a coffee shop in the early morning hours with a man. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Gail Barris was a 30-year-old single mother of 3 from Michigan. Life wasn't easy. She worked 2 jobs at local bars to make ends meet and provide for her children. That night, between 3 and 4 a.m., Gail was seen leaving Speed's coffee shop in Battle Creek, Michigan with a dark-haired man. Just over 2 weeks later, on October 25th, hunters in a nearby town called Emmett made a horrifying discovery. They found the lifeless body of a woman lying on River Road. She had been brutally stabbed and sexually assaulted. Authorities quickly identified the victim as Gail Barris. Investigators launched an extensive investigation, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence from the crime scene. Just days before her body was found, on October 22nd, police approached a 24-year-old man named Roger Plato. He had been linked to another recent abduction and assault, and his car matched the suspect's description. At 4:30 p.m. that day, officers attempted to detain Plato at gunpoint in a parking lot in Bellevue. However, he resisted arrest, became aggressive, and tried to wrestle a gun away from a detective. In the struggle, Plato was shot and later died from his injuries. Because he was never questioned, any potential information he had about Gail's murder was lost. Before his body was cremated, an autopsy was performed, and a blood sample was taken and stored at a private lab. With Plato dead, investigators turned their attention to his former roommate and friend, Richard Compton, a man with a long criminal record. However, when police approached him, he denied knowing anything about the case. With no further leads, Gail's case eventually went cold. Years later, in 2018, Battle Creek cold case detective Scott Marshall reopened the investigation. One of his first discoveries was that Compton's DNA had never been tested, making him the prime suspect. After digging further, Marshall found out that Compton had died in 2009. He was buried at the County International Cemetery in Austin, Texas. At the time of his death, he was 59 years old, the breakthrough in Gail Barris' case. Detective Marshall obtained a search warrant and traveled to Texas to exhume Richard Compton's body. When examined, his DNA did not match the samples found on Gail Barris' body. However, it did match previously unidentified hairs collected from the crime scene. Then, in November 2020, the case took an unexpected turn, almost by chance. Sergeant Chris Bassick of the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department was conducting an inventory of old evidence when he stumbled upon a vial containing a blood sample taken from Roger Plato before his cremation. On January 3, 2021, forensic experts confirmed that Plato's DNA matched the samples found on Gail Barris' body. This proved that he was responsible for the assault and murder. Investigators also believe that Compton may have witnessed the crime. Although both men died without facing justice, Gail Barris' family finally got some closure. Detective Marshall emphasized that DNA technology continues to be the key to solving long-standing cold cases. Next, Stephanie Summers. On August 31, 1980, Stephanie Summers was excited to spend the day celebrating her nephew's birthday, but she never showed up. Later that day, police found her lifeless body inside her home. Stephanie was a 36-year-old woman living in an apartment in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. She had recently moved there from Newhall, Santa Clarita, and was thrilled about the new chapter in her life. That morning, she was getting ready to pick up her 11-year-old nephew, Kelly Roberts, for a fun day at Six Flags Magic Mountain, a belated birthday celebration. Kelly, dressed up for the occasion, eagerly waited for his aunt, but she never arrived. Worried, her family contacted the police. When officers went to her apartment to check on her, they made a gruesome discovery. Stephanie had been murdered inside her home. Forensic experts collected evidence from the crime scene and from her body. Investigators interviewed multiple people, but every lead turned into a dead end, and the case eventually went cold. For more than 3 decades, her murder remained unsolved, until 2014, when Los Angeles detectives received a fresh lead. The breakthrough in Stephanie Summers' case. The new lead pointed to a man named Harold Anthony Parkinson, who lived just a mile from Stephanie's home, and quickly became the prime suspect. On June 19, 2014, investigators tested Parkinson's DNA, and it was a match to the DNA profile collected from Stephanie's body. He was officially charged with her murder. However, Parkinson was already in prison, serving a sentence of 15 years to life at Chuckawalla Valley State Prison in Blythe for an unrelated crime. That crime occurred on April 8, 1981, when Parkinson shot and killed a man named Derek Eugene Perry in Los Angeles. Perry later died from his injuries. Parkinson was arrested and began serving his sentence on March 5, 1982. Derek Perry's sister Dolly recalled their last meal together at a Sizzler restaurant. "He gave me a hug and told me he loved me," she said. She remembered her brother as an exceptional BMX rider, a skilled surfer, and a caring older sibling. Authorities never disclosed a motive for the attack. When Dolly learned that Parkinson had also been charged with Stephanie Summers' murder, she called him a dangerous man who should never be released. In court, Parkinson's lawyer argued that he hadn't assaulted Stephanie, claiming instead that they had been romantically involved and had been together just days before her murder. However, prosecutors pointed out that Stephanie, after a brief marriage, had told friends she was only attracted to women. Los Angeles Judge Kathleen Kennedy described the crime as horrible, violent, and degrading. She ruled that there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Parkinson was responsible for Stephanie's death. On February 4, 2021, at age 61, Harold Parkinson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Next, Sylvia May Quayle. On August 4, 1981, William Quayle walked over to his daughter Sylvia's home in Cherry Hills Village near Denver, Colorado. She lived just 150 feet from his house. What he found inside was something no parent should ever have to witness: the murder of Sylvia May Quayle. Sylvia May Quayle, 34, was described by friends as ambitious, vibrant, and someone who lit up every room she entered. She had a deep love for history and worked as a secretary at an architectural firm. A talented cook, she had even started her own business specializing in wedding cakes. Sylvia had many friends and was passionate about art, especially pottery. Some of her creations still decorate her sister's home decades later, but above all, she was extremely close to her family. She lived just 150 feet from her parents' house and shared morning coffee with them every day. Until that morning, the crime scene. Just before 8 a.m. on August 4th, 1,981 police were dispatched to Sylvia's home after her father, William Quayle, made a devastating 911 call. The night before, around 11 p.m., Sylvia had spoken with her sister on the phone. Investigators determined that she was killed sometime between the end of that phone call and the moment her father discovered her lifeless body 9 hours later. William Quayle told officers that when he arrived at the house, he found his daughter lying naked on the living room floor. A brutal investigation followed. Sylvia had been shot, stabbed multiple times, strangled, and sexually assaulted. The autopsy confirmed that the cause of death was excessive blood loss. Clues in earlier investigation. Police found 2 critical clues at the scene. The telephone line in the living room, as well as an exterior phone line, had been cut. 140 pieces of evidence were collected, and over the years, investigators repeatedly revisited them as forensic technology advanced. In 1983, 2 years after Sylvia's murder, forensic technicians made a breakthrough. They used an alternative light source and detected DNA evidence on the rug beneath Sylvia's body. The sample did not belong to her. That same year, hope briefly flickered for investigators in the Quayle family when notorious serial killer Otis Elwood Toole confessed to Sylvia's murder. However, many of Toole's confessions were later found to be false. The investigation into Sylvia May Quayle's murder. Otis Elwood Toole's confession initially seemed promising, but doubts quickly arose. Toole, along with his companion Henry Lee Lucas, had claimed responsibility for hundreds of murders, yet authorities were only able to confirm a handful. In 1993, all charges against Toole in Sylvia Quayle's case were dropped. That same year, Forensic testing conclusively proved that Toole was not the source of the DNA found at the crime scene. By 1995, investigators took a major step. They submitted a section of the rug from Sylvia's home to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for testing. 5 years later, in 2000, the sample finally provided a male DNA profile. However, there were no matches in the national database, and the case once again went cold. A breakthrough with genetic genealogy. Fast forward to January 2020, Cherry Hills Village cold case detectives decided to apply the latest forensic tool, genetic genealogy, to Sylvia's case. 4 months later, their efforts yielded a name, David Dwayne Anderson. At the time of Sylvia's murder, Anderson was a 22-year-old man living just a couple of miles away from her home. As detectives dug into his past, they discovered a troubling history of crimes, including at least 8 burglaries between 1981 and 1986. In one case, he had removed a window screen to gain entry, an eerie similarity to the crime scene at Sylvia's house. Detective Robert Fuller, one of the lead investigators, traveled to Cozad, Nebraska, where Anderson now lived. There, Fuller covertly collected DNA from 2 trash bags Anderson had discarded in a dumpster. Inside, he found 15 items that potentially held Anderson's genetic material, including a vanilla Coke can. On January 29, 2021, forensic testing confirmed a match. Anderson's DNA was identical to the DNA found on Sylvia's body and at the crime scene. Justice, but too late for Sylvia's parents. On February 10, 2021, David Dwayne Anderson, now 62 years old, was arrested and charged with Sylvia Quayle's murder, nearly 40 years after the crime. The first photograph is of Anderson in 1980. If anyone recognizes this photograph of him from this time period and has information surrounding or involving this case, we ask that you please call the Cherry Hills Village Police Department tip line at 720-305-9831. William and Mary Quayle didn't live to see their daughter's killer charged. Sadly, William and Mary Quayle never lived to see their daughter's killer brought to justice. William passed away in 1999 and his wife Mary followed in 2009 with the final case. Bonnie Baker. On the night of June 30th, 1998, Bonnie Baker was out celebrating. She had just received a promotion at work. She was having fun with friends when her boyfriend, Crispin Nane Perez, arrived at the gathering. Their interaction was tense. Shortly after, they both left together. That was the last time anyone saw Bonnie Baker alive. The investigation into Bonnie Baker's disappearance. Unlike Bonnie, who was thriving at work, Crispin Nane Perez had been fired a month earlier for missing shifts. On the night of June 30th, 1998, Bonnie was excited to celebrate her promotion. She joined a group of friends at a party in Golden, Colorado, where they drank, danced, and enjoyed themselves. But the mood shifted drastically when Nane Perez arrived towards the old wife. A heated confrontation. Almost immediately, Nane Perez began causing a scene. Witnesses later described him as jealous and furious, particularly when he saw Bonnie dancing with friends. His eyes were red and glazed, and his erratic behavior suggested he was under the influence of illicit substances. Partygoers recalled him glaring at everyone, looking as if he were searching for trouble. Sensing danger, Bonnie confided in a friend, saying, "It would be better if I just go now or it will be worse." Shortly after, she and Nane Perez left together. A mysterious 911 call. At 8 p.m. that night, authorities received a disturbing phone call from an unidentified woman. She reported that a man had killed a woman inside an apartment on West Louisiana Avenue. Even more chillingly, she claimed the man was planning to drive to Mexico with the woman's body in the trunk of a red vehicle. Police traced the call to a payphone, but when they arrived at the West Louisiana Avenue apartment, they found no signs of a struggle and no one was there. A strange car crash. The next day, Nane Perez's car was involved in a single-vehicle crash near Globe, Arizona. However, before authorities could question him, he fled the scene on foot. When investigators impounded and examined the car, they discovered bloodstains in the trunk. The blood was collected as evidence. But with no body and no suspect, the case soon went cold. A year without answers. For over a year, Bonnie Baker's fate remained unknown. Her friends and family desperately sought answers, but no new developments emerged. Until, at last, a breakthrough surfaced. A break in the case. On July 31st, 1999, two boys were horseback riding in a remote area of Navajo tribal land in New Mexico when they stumbled upon something chilling. A human skull. They immediately contacted authorities. Investigators arrived and searched the surrounding area, soon uncovering several more skeletal remains. However, with no clear cause of death and no immediate connection to Bonnie Baker, the case went cold. The investigation reopens. In October 2012, Denver Gales, Denver cold case detective Kenneth Klaus, was assigned Bonnie's case. Determined to uncover the truth, he contacted an FBI agent in New Mexico to discuss her 1998 disappearance. As part of the renewed investigation, DNA samples from the skeletal remains found in the Navajo region were sent to Denver's crime lab for forensic testing. The results were unmistakable. They matched Bonnie Baker. A key witness comes forward. Then, on April 4, 2013, a major breakthrough occurred. The mysterious woman who had called 911 the night Bonnie vanished finally came forward. She admitted to making the call and provided shocking new details. She had entered the couple's apartment after Bonnie and Nene Perez disappeared. The scene inside was chaotic. Broken plates and glasses covered the floor, and the kitchen table was overturned. He had cleaned the apartment before the authorities arrived. She described the red car in detail, later identified as a geoprism along with its license plate number. Most chillingly, she recalled Nene Perez's ominous words that night. "I know that you don't like Bonnie. Something bad happened to us. You will never have to see Bonnie again because I am going to make her disappear." Authorities have not disclosed her exact relationship with Bonnie and Nene Perez. The hunt for Nene as the case gained momentum. Another Oniscala witness identified Nene Perez as the driver of the red car on the night Bonnie vanished. After multiple witness interviews and forensic DNA tests, detectives finally had enough evidence to charge Nene Perez. A warrant was issued for his arrest. But there was one major problem. Nene Perez had fled to Mexico. For years, his capture remained elusive. Justice finally catches her. Prosecutors theorized that Bonnie Baker's body had been left in a shallow grave within a day of her disappearance. Finally, after relentless efforts, Nene Perez was extradited to Colorado and brought to face justice. On January 27, 2021, his preliminary hearing was held in a Denver courtroom. He now faces charges for the kidnapping and murder of Bonnie Baker. Story 3. Looks can be dangerously misleading. Someone who seems kind, charming, and friendly may actually be hiding dark intentions and posing a serious threat. That's why it's so important to be cautious and never blindly trust anyone. History is full of cases where seemingly charismatic people gained the trust of their victims, only to commit horrific crimes. Some of the most infamous examples include figures like Ted Bundy and Rodney Alcala, who used their good looks and charm to mask their true monstrous nature. But one particularly shocking case happened in the fall of 2020, involving the tragic deaths of well-known soccer referee Daniele DeSantis and his fiancée Eleonora Manta. This crime was not only horrifying in its brutality, but also deeply unsettling due to its apparent lack of motive. As investigators worked on the case, the identity of the killer left everyone stunned. Behind an innocent-looking facade was someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. Even more disturbing, the perpetrator admitted they intended to commit more crimes, taking pleasure in causing harm. This horrifying case left a lasting impact, not just because of its senseless violence, but because of the cold, calculated nature of the attack and the criminal's disturbing future intentions. It's a haunting reminder that a person's true character isn't always visible on the surface. Daniele DeSantis was born in 1987 in the Italian city of Lecce. He was the eldest of 3 siblings in a loving and well-off family. Growing up with his 2 younger sisters, he formed strong bonds with them from an early age. Sports played a huge role in Danielle's life, with soccer becoming his biggest passion. After high school, he went on to study at a prestigious Italian university. Daniele pursued a degree in law and graduated in 2009. While studying, he also worked hard to build a successful career as a soccer referee. He started as an assistant referee, and in 2017, he made his debut as the fourth official in a match between Pisa and Benevento. Over the years, his dedication and talent earned him opportunities to officiate in Serie C and Serie B matches, overseeing more than 130 games in total. On the field, Daniele was known for his charismatic personality, athletic build, and strong presence. His career brought him financial success and the promise of an even brighter future. He had big dreams and was determined to keep growing in his profession. But Daniele wasn't just talented in his career. His personal life was just as fulfilling. He was in a loving relationship with Eleonora Manta, a charming young woman 3 years younger than him. The couple had plans to marry soon. Eleonora was born in Milan in 1990 and grew up in a modest home. She was the youngest of 3 children with 2 older twin brothers. During her early school years, her parents divorced and her father eventually remarried. After that, he became mostly absent from his children's lives, leaving their mother to raise them on her own. From a young age, Eleonora was passionate about sports and dance, dedicating herself fully to both. These shared interests led her to cross paths with Daniele in 2019, and their instant connection quickly grew into a deep romantic relationship. Friends and family described them as a perfect couple, harmonious, loving, and completely trusting of each other. Those close to them said they never argued and always supported one another. Eleonora had long dreamed of earning a law degree, and in 2020, she won a competitive placement in a prestigious university program specializing in law and international relations. Overjoyed by the opportunity, she eagerly started her studies that September. By the summer of 2020, Daniele and Eleonora decided to take the next step in their relationship and move in together. They chose Danielle's spacious apartment in a modern, upscale residential complex. At the time, Daniele had been renting one of the rooms to a medical student, but his tenant needed time to find alternative housing. The transition went smoothly, and Eleonora gradually moved her belongings into her boyfriend's home. By September 2020, life seemed to be falling perfectly into place for Daniele De Santis and Eleonora Manta. Danielle's former tenant had officially moved out, and the couple was excited to start this new chapter together. Eleonora had officially moved in, bringing all her belongings, and the couple was just days away from starting their new life together permanently. They were also busy planning their wedding, a day that was meant to be the happiest of their lives. Daniele was scheduled to officiate an Italian Cup match between Monopoli and Medina on September 23rd, but tragically he would never make it to that day. On the evening of September 21st, Daniele and Eleonora were celebrating her move with a quiet, romantic dinner in his apartment. Everything seemed perfect, until around 9:45 p.m., when the peaceful night was shattered. Suddenly, a chilling scream for help echoed through the building, followed by the sounds of a violent struggle. Alarmed neighbors listened in horror as the disturbing noise continued for nearly 10 minutes. Nearly a dozen calls flooded emergency services, with callers reporting what sounded like a brutal attack. None of them realized just how horrifyingly accurate their fears were. Shortly after 10 p.m., a 12-year-old boy walking his dog across the street from the building witnessed something that would haunt him forever. He had heard the screams but hadn't fully understood what was happening, until he saw a young man suddenly run out of the apartment complex. The man hesitated for a brief moment before heading toward the boy. The child later recalled the stranger's cold, emotionless expression and the knife he held in his hand. Frozen in fear, the boy wasn't sure what would happen next. Thankfully, a few passers-by appeared nearby, prompting the man to flee. Despite his attempts to hide his face, several people got a clear look at him before he disappeared into the night. Moments later, police and ambulances arrived at the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Daniele and Eleonora were already gone. Daniele was found lying on his back in the stairwell, unresponsive, surrounded by a massive pool of blood. The door to the apartment was wide open. Inside, Eleonora's body was discovered in the hallway, face down, her clothes and hair soaked in blood. Both had succumbed to their injuries before emergency responders arrived. The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds, leading to massive blood loss. Forensic experts counted 38 stab wounds on Daniele and 37 on Eleonora, an extreme level of violence that raised chilling questions. Who could commit such a savage attack? And why would anyone target this young, loving couple? At first, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. After all, Daniele was a well-known public figure. And it was no secret that he was financially successful. At first, investigators considered the possibility that someone had broken in after hearing a tip, expecting to find valuables. Perhaps they hadn't anticipated the couple being home and panicked when confronted. However, this theory was quickly ruled out. Nothing valuable was taken from the apartment. Cash was left out in the open, untouched. Even more telling, Eleonora was still wearing an expensive set of jewelry that Daniele had given her during their engagement, including earrings, a necklace, and a diamond ring. If robbery had been the motive, it made no sense that the attacker had left these valuable items behind. One of the most disturbing aspects of the crime was its sheer brutality. Both victims had been savagely stabbed multiple times, suggesting a deeply personal motive, something driven by intense hatred or rage. This led detectives to consider whether the crime was fueled by passion. Could it have been the work of a jealous ex or someone seeking revenge? At one point, investigators explored the idea of a love triangle, wondering if an affair had triggered this horrific act. But that theory was quickly dismissed. Friends and family insisted that Daniele and Eleonora were deeply in love and completely loyal to each other. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility that someone else had harbored unrequited feelings for one of them, leading to a dangerous obsession. At the crime scene, investigators found several unusual objects that didn't belong to the couple. Among them were zip ties, a few bottles of bleach, and a blood-stained stocking. These items were scattered around the room, suggesting they had been brought by the killer. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the stocking had traces of Danielle's blood, along with the DNA of an unknown man. It seemed likely that the attacker had worn the stocking as a mask, but during the violent struggle, Daniele had managed to rip it off. There was also a chilling detail. Someone had drawn a sad face on the fabric with a black marker. With witness accounts, police were able to create a composite sketch of the suspect. The most detailed description came from the 12-year-old boy who had come face-to-face with the attacker. Understandably, the child was terrified, and given that it was late at night, investigators were concerned about the accuracy of his recollection. Still, the boy was able to provide valuable details, particularly about the man's clothing and the backpack he was carrying. Unfortunately, while the sketch gave investigators a starting point, it did not immediately lead to a breakthrough in the case. As detectives interviewed witnesses, some recalled hearing Eleonora desperately pleading with someone to stop. She even shouted a name multiple times, something that sounded like Andrea. This was the first significant lead in the case. Investigators immediately began looking into every man named Andrea connected to the couple, hoping this clue would lead them to the killer. The first person under suspicion was Andrea Fermati, an old acquaintance of Eleonora from her teenage years. Although they lived in different cities and rarely interacted, they still followed each other on social media. Detectives speculated that Fermati might have secretly had feelings for Eleonora for years. Perhaps, upon learning about her engagement, he acted on a twisted idea. If he couldn't have her, no one could, leading him to target both her and Daniele. Fermati was quickly located and brought in for questioning. He was horrified to hear about Eleonora's death and even more shocked to find himself a suspect. However, his alibi was airtight. On the night of the crime, he was on a business trip in Rome, and his presence there was confirmed by multiple witnesses and security camera footage. He was ruled out. The next person detectives investigated was Andrea Martinelli, a longtime friend of Daniele. They considered the possibility that Martinelli had secretly been in love with Eleonora and resented Daniele for being with her. Their suspicions grew when they found phone records showing that Martinelli and Daniele had spoken just 3 hours before the murder. However, Martinelli also had an ironclad alibi. His whereabouts were verified by multiple people at the time of the attack, eliminating him as a suspect. With no success in their search, investigators turned their attention to another man named Andrea Rodeo, a 37-year-old who had been a more recent acquaintance of the couple. He closely resembled the composite sketch, making him a prime suspect. Rodeo was detained, and witnesses were brought in to identify him. But every witness, without hesitation, said that the man they had seen the night of the murder was someone else. Adding to his defense, Rodeo also had a solid alibi. With no evidence against him, he was released. After exhausting all leads connected to the name Andrea, the investigation suddenly hit a dead end. Detectives began to question whether Eleonora had actually shouted a different name during the attack. If that were the case, the time spent investigating men named Andrea may have been wasted. Now, finding new leads was more critical than ever. During a second, more thorough search of the crime scene, investigators uncovered a crucial piece of evidence that had been overlooked earlier. Beneath a small shoe rack, they found a folded piece of paper, likely dropped by the killer. The paper appeared to be torn from a student notebook, and it contained hastily written instructions. The chilling note outlined a step-by-step plan for breaking into the apartment and carrying out the crime. It specifically mentioned subduing the couple using zip ties, the same ones found at the scene. This discovery confirmed that the attack had been meticulously premeditated. The perpetrator had come prepared, intending to restrain and harm the victims. However, for reasons unknown, the attacker abandoned parts of their plan. Most likely, this was due to the couple's fierce resistance. The loud screams and struggle heard by numerous neighbors may have also made the killer panic, fearing they would be caught in the act. The note also revealed that the murderer had been watching the apartment beforehand, walking near the windows, and listening at the door to make sure the couple was alone. Other disturbing details included instructions to disguise themselves with a nylon stocking, change into clean clothes after the crime, and use bleach to destroy evidence. But the note provided no clues about the killer's motive. At the bottom of the page was a hand-drawn map of the victim's neighborhood. The map marked the locations of outdoor surveillance cameras on buildings and utility poles. It also outlined multiple escape routes designed to avoid these cameras. Yet, despite all this careful planning, the murderer ignored these precautions while fleeing the scene. Witnesses had clearly seen the suspect running away, and investigators were able to track part of the escape route using surveillance footage. Even with these leads, the case remained at a standstill. The composite sketch of the suspect had been circulating in newspapers and on TV for days, but no strong leads had surfaced until September 26th. That day, a young man walked into a police station and reported that the sketch strongly resembled his classmate, a 21-year-old medical student named Antonio DeMarco. What caught the attention of investigators was that Antonio had not attended classes or contacted anyone at the university for several days. Following the crime, it soon came to light that Antonio had previously rented a room in Daniele DeSantis's apartment, but had moved out a few months earlier. He had not initially been considered a person of interest because he no longer lived there. Antonio was described as quiet and unremarkable, someone who avoided conflict and focused solely on his studies. Many people in the building didn't even remember that Daniele had once rented out a room. Those who did recall Antonio spoke of him positively. He was diligent, polite, and reserved. He rarely interacted with others, didn't attend social gatherings or parties, and had no known romantic relationships. To most, he seemed like a typical bookworm. Law enforcement quickly obtained handwriting samples from Antonio's university records to compare with the writing on the note found at the crime scene. Forensic analysis confirmed a perfect match, leaving little doubt that the police had identified their suspect. At first, investigators struggled to determine Antonio's current address. After leaving Danielle's apartment, he had not officially registered a new residence. However, detectives managed to track him down through his mother, who provided them with his whereabouts. Antonio was renting a room in a shared house with two other students, just 3 blocks from the crime scene. The lease was under another student's name, and the rent was split between the 3 of them. On September 28, 2020, a week after the murders, Antonio DeMarco was arrested outside a comic book store, where he had been casually browsing and purchasing a magazine. When approached by officers, he showed no surprise, made no attempt to resist, and didn't try to escape. Instead, he gave a crooked smirk and simply asked, "How long did it take you to find me?" From the outset, Antonio did not deny his involvement. He displayed no emotion, no remorse, and answered investigators' questions with cold, detached detail, almost as if he took pleasure in recounting the events of that night. He admitted to seeing the young eyewitness walking his dog, and even confessed that he had considered silencing the boy, but was in too much of a rush. He also noted that other people in the area had made it too risky. Antonio's chillingly calm demeanor and lack of regret stood in stark contrast to his angelic appearance, and the glowing remarks from his university professors and supervisors at the hospital, where he was training as a medical intern. Despite being known as a shy student, Antonio had been considered a promising and dedicated young doctor. Detectives knew there had to be more to his story. To understand how someone like Antonio could commit such an atrocity, they turned to the person who knew him best, his mother. She had raised him alone. Antonio was her only child, deeply cherished and adored. She was devastated by the accusations against him. During questioning, she admitted that her son had always been different. As a child, he struggled to connect with others, avoided forming friendships, and preferred solitude. In his teenage years, Antonio became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in his room drawing or working on projects, reacting aggressively if interrupted. Concerned, his mother took him to a specialist. Antonio was eventually diagnosed with multiple mental health disorders and socialization issues. Despite these challenges, he excelled academically, particularly in subjects like math and science, which helped him secure a spot in medical school. However, his difficulties in socializing never faded. He experienced panic attacks and gradually retreated into a fictional world of comic books, further distancing himself from reality. A psychiatrist prescribed medication to help manage his condition, but according to his mother, Antonio did not adhere to the prescribed dosage. He would often skip his medication for weeks and then take dangerously high doses all at once. As part of his therapy, Antonio's psychiatrist recommended he keep a personal journal as an outlet for his thoughts and emotions. Given his difficulty expressing himself, this was meant to help him process his feelings. His mother later turned this journal over to investigators. At first, the entries seemed relatively harmless. Antonio wrote about his longing to live a normal life, making friends, dating, and fitting in. But he struggled to others and felt unsure of how to navigate social interactions. During his time at university, Antonio lived with his mother until he came across an advertisement for a room for rent at a reasonable price. The apartment where Daniele lived was conveniently close to the university, so Antonio quickly responded to the listing. He proved to be a quiet and responsible tenant, paying his rent on time and causing no trouble. Based on his journal entries, Antonio seemed to view Daniele as a potential friend during that period. He admired Danielle's confidence, social ease, and the way he was respected by others. However, the dynamic shifted when Eleonora entered the picture. The couple spent increasing amounts of time together, with Eleonora often staying overnight. Daniele and Eleonora decided to live together permanently, and Daniele asked Antonio to move out. On the surface, Antonio accepted it, but deep inside, he saw it as a betrayal. Instead of arguing, he plotted. What followed was a brutal struggle. Antonio attacked, stabbing Daniele repeatedly. Despite his injuries, Daniele fought back to protect Eleonora. She pleaded for mercy, but Antonio was unmoved. As sirens loomed, he hastily tried to erase evidence before fleeing into the night. His plan unraveled when a young boy saw him fleeing, and a careless mistake sealed his fate. In the interrogation room, Antonio remained disturbingly calm, detailing the crime as if it were an experiment. When asked why, he simply said, "Because they took everything from me." At trial, his lack of remorse and calculated brutality left no doubt. He was sentenced to life without parole. While justice was served, Daniele and Eleonora's families were left with irreparable loss. Antonio's case sparked debate. Was he born a monster, or did he become one? Experts speculated he could have been a serial killer if not caught. Even as his name faded from headlines, his story remained a chilling reminder. Sometimes the greatest darkness hides in plain sight. Story 4. The Shafia family escaped war and chaos, hoping to start fresh in Canada. They were originally from Afghanistan, a country where tradition dictates fate, and family honor matters more than personal freedom. On the surface, they seemed like an ordinary immigrant family. A father who had built a successful business, 2 wives, and 7 children. But behind this image of success was a much darker reality. Their lives were ruled by strict control, fear, and harsh discipline. Then, one day, they became the center of one of the most shocking and tragic crimes in Canadian history. Mohammed Shafia was born into a poor Afghan family. His father died when he was just 2 years old, leaving his mother to raise the family alone. From a young age, he knew survival meant being tough. Education was a luxury he couldn't afford, so he started working early. At first, he helped his mother with household chores, then moved on to fixing appliances. Over time, he discovered he could make money by buying and reselling goods for profit. His business quickly grew: electronics, furniture, cars. He always found new ways to expand his wealth. Without formal schooling, he relied on instinct and sharp business skills to seize opportunities. As his fortune grew, he decided it was time to start a family. Rona came from a wealthy and respected background. Her family valued tradition but also made sure their daughters were educated. She grew up in a loving home, but her future was already decided. Like most young women in her community, she was expected to marry the man her parents chose for her. When they told her she would be marrying Mohammed Shafia, she had no say in the matter. She accepted it as her duty. Their wedding was a grand event, held at one of Kabul's finest hotels, with hundreds of guests in attendance. To the outside world, it seemed like a perfect union between 2 honorable families. No one ever asked Rona what she truly wanted. After the wedding, her life changed completely. She was expected to obey her husband, manage the household, and meet all his expectations. Years passed, but she never had children. In Afghan society, a woman's worth is often tied to her ability to bear children, and without them, Rona's position in the family became uncertain. Mohammed grew frustrated, and soon, rumors spread among relatives that she couldn't conceive. His frustration turned into cold indifference, and the distance between them only grew. After 7 childless years, Mohammed decided to take a second wife. Tuba was younger, more obedient, and most importantly, able to give him heirs. Soon after their marriage, she gave birth to their first son, followed by another child. With each birth, her influence in the household grew, while Rona was pushed further into the background. Mohammed ruled his household with strict, unquestioned authority. No one dared defy him. Any disobedience was met with humiliation or physical punishment. He controlled all the finances, made every decision, and demanded absolute respect. The women in the home had no freedom beyond what he allowed. Tuba didn't just accept these rules. She reinforced them. She fully embraced her role as the primary wife, completely overshadowing Rona. Over time, she became the one in charge of the household, managing the children, the money, and even Rona's fate. Her treatment of Rona grew harsher, isolating her from the children and stripping her of even the most basic freedoms. Hamad, the eldest son, became an enforcer of control over his sisters. Raised in a home where men ruled and women obeyed without question, he followed his father's beliefs without hesitation. He saw it as his duty to watch over his sisters, ensuring they followed the family's strict rules and reporting any signs of defiance. The sisters, Zab, Sahar, and Gadi, lived under constant surveillance. Any attempt to challenge their father or Hamad led to punishment. They weren't allowed to make friends, leave the house freely, or even choose their own clothes. Mohammed didn't see his daughters as individuals with their own dreams. To him, they were simply extensions of the family, meant to uphold his idea of honor. When the family moved to Canada, many assumed this would give the children a chance at a better life. But a new country didn't change the way their household operated. If anything, Mohammed's control became even stricter. He knew his children were now in a place where women had rights, so he tightened his grip to maintain authority. The daughters soon realized that life outside their home was nothing like what they had known. They watched their classmates interact freely, choose their own clothes, and make decisions about their futures. But inside their home, nothing changed. Hamad, their eldest brother, became even more controlling. He monitored their phones, watched their behavior at school, and reported everything to their parents to ensure they didn't adopt Western habits. Rona had once hoped that moving to Canada would change her life, but her fate remained the same. She didn't know the language, had no legal documents, and couldn't work. Without a passport or financial independence, she was completely under the family's control. For the Shafia family, Canada wasn't a land of freedom. It was simply a new place where their old rules still applied. Zab, Mohammed's eldest daughter, was the first to openly defy the family. Despite the strict control over her, she secretly started a relationship with a young man named Ammar. He was older, Pakistani, and most importantly, someone her father would never approve of. Their connection began with passing notes, then evolved into emails and eventually secret meetings. Zab knew the risks. At home, she was constantly watched by Hamad. Even at school, she never felt completely safe. But her love for Ammar made her willing to take the chance. When her father left for a business trip, she saw an opportunity and invited Ammar to the house, believing no one would find out. But Hamad happened to notice a pair of unfamiliar shoes in the hallway. He immediately realized that someone from outside had entered the home. Without hesitation, he reported it to his parents. Ammar managed to escape, but Zab faced brutal consequences. She was physically punished and locked in her room for months, forbidden from stepping outside. While she remained in isolation, Sahar tried to fight for her freedom in a different way. She didn't rebel openly, but slowly distanced herself from the strict expectations of her family. At school, she removed her headscarf, wore makeup, and dressed in ways that were strictly forbidden at home. She also grew close to Ricardo, a young man from Honduras, the complete opposite of the kind of husband her parents would have chosen. Sahar longed for freedom and seriously planned her escape. She and Ricardo discussed fleeing to another country, where her family wouldn't be able to find her. The plan was to make it seem like she had gone to Honduras while secretly crossing into the United States. But one unexpected moment shattered everything. One evening, while having dinner at a cafe with Ricardo, she suddenly noticed her brother watching her from another table. He didn't say a word or approach her, but his presence alone sent a terrifying message. She was in serious danger. When she returned home, she braced for the worst. Her father already knew everything. There were no discussions, only punishment. After enduring physical violence, she was forbidden from attending school. Realizing that escaping could put her life at even greater risk, Sahar understood that getting away from her family would be much harder than she had imagined. Amid all this turmoil, Giddy, the youngest sister, expressed her defiance in a different way. She didn't try to run away or pursue a secret relationship. Instead, she acted out at school. Her aggressive behavior, frequent absences, and open defiance of teachers were her way of resisting. She wanted someone to notice that something was terribly wrong at home. Her behavior led to a meeting with the principal and social services. But when her parents were called in, they blamed Western influence, claiming that Giddy's actions were just a phase. They assured social workers they would handle the situation themselves. The sisters' attempts to break free only made things worse. Their father and brother became convinced they were losing control, and in their eyes, that meant punishment was necessary. The conflict between the daughters and their family had reached a breaking point. Their fate was now sealed. When Zab, Sahar, and Giddy tried to break free from their family's control, they knew the risks. But they never expected that the very system meant to protect them would be powerless against their father and brother's authority. Zab was the first to seek help. After months of confinement, she realized her only chance at survival was to leave for good. She escaped and found refuge in a shelter for women in crisis. For the first time, she felt safe. But her disappearance didn't go unnoticed. Hamed immediately contacted the police, claiming his sister had been kidnapped. He even accused Ammar, hoping to get him arrested. When the police found Zab, she told them the truth. She had left on her own to escape her family. The authorities didn't force her to return, but they also failed to offer her real protection. She was left vulnerable, and she knew it. After seeing what happened to her sister, Sahar tried to find her own way out. She was too afraid to go directly to the police, so she reached out to Child Protective Services. She told them about the strict rules, the constant threats, and her fear for her life. The caseworkers listened, but in the end, they decided not to intervene. As Sahar neared her 18th birthday, she was offered temporary shelter, but it came with one unavoidable condition. Once her stay ended, she would have to return home. Terrified, Sahar knew that if she went back, the punishment awaiting her would be far worse than anything she had previously endured. She declined their help, realizing that the system could offer no real protection. Rona was the only one who understood the true danger the sisters were facing. But she, too, was powerless to intervene. Living in fear herself, she knew that Muhammad and Tuba no longer saw their daughters as obedient family members, but as threats to their honor. She also understood that any attempt to intervene would be futile. Inside the Shafieh household, it had become painfully clear. The daughters had defied the rules. They had openly rejected the traditional way of life. To their father and brother, this was not just defiance. It was an unforgivable betrayal, an attack on the family's reputation. Muhammad could not allow rumors about his disobedient daughters to spread. In Afghan culture, such stories traveled quickly, and losing respect in the community was unimaginable. What angered him most was that their defiance had occurred in Canada, a place where he couldn't control their environment like he could in Afghanistan. The greatest threat in their eyes was Zab. She hadn't merely disobeyed, she had run away. To them, this was unthinkable. She was living on her own, making her own decisions, no longer bound by her father's rules. This was the ultimate betrayal. Tuba realized that forcing Zab to return wouldn't work, so she devised a plan to lure her back willingly. She contacted her daughter, telling her that their father had had a change of heart and given his blessing for her to marry Ammar. Zab could now be with him officially. On May 18, 2009, a religious ceremony took place at an Islamic center. The next day, Zab had her hair styled and her hands decorated with henna. Her uncle drove her to a restaurant, making one last attempt to convince her to reconsider the marriage. But Zab remained firm. She wanted to go through with it. However, her fleeting freedom was short-lived. None of the groom's family members attended the ceremony. They, too, disapproved of the marriage. Tuba, overwhelmed with humiliation, collapsed, fainting from the embarrassment. People tried to revive her by pouring water on her. At that moment, Zab ran into her mother's arms, saying, "If you're against the marriage, I'll walk away from him." Zab requested a divorce and Ammar agreed. "I can't bring shame to my family," he said. Right there in the restaurant, a cleric declared them divorced. They had been married for just 24 hours. After the annulment, Zab's relationship with Ammar fell apart. Under extreme pressure from her family, she was forced to sever all ties with him. The restrictions on her life became even stricter, her movements monitored, her interactions controlled. Ammar tried to stay in touch, but her family made it impossible. Eventually, their relationship ended completely, adding even more emotional pain to an already agonizing situation. This was when Zab realized she would never truly be free. Her hope for independence had been crushed. Following this, tensions between Zab and her family reached a breaking point. The situation escalated, leading to tragic consequences. This was the point of no return. Muhammad, once hesitant, now saw that his daughters had no intention of conforming. To him, their disobedience was an irreparable dishonor to the family. Hamid, too, insisted that waiting any longer wasn't an option. In his eyes, there was only one solution. The daughters had to face the consequences. Betrayal could not be forgiven. Women who tarnished the family's honor had to be punished. Hamid believed their father had been too lenient for too long. If they didn't act immediately, the family's reputation would be at risk. The decision was made. The daughters would no longer have the right to live. Now, all that remained was to figure out how to carry out their plan. Mohammed, knowing the severity of the crime, didn't want to draw attention. He knew that this act couldn't be spontaneous. It had to look like an accident. Thus, the planning began, leading to an unimaginable tragedy. Weeks of preparation ensued. Mohammed, Tuba, and Hamid discussed the details carefully. One key step involved acquiring a second vehicle, a Nissan Sentra. It was officially purchased for convenience, but in truth it was meant to play a vital role in the upcoming plan. A vacation together would give the impression that everything was fine and that they were working to mend their relationships. Zab, Sahar, Jiddy, and Rona had no choice but to go. Even if they had doubts, resisting their father's decision was pointless. From the beginning of the trip, they felt uneasy, but none of them could have imagined that this journey would be their last. Everything went according to plan. For several days, the family visited tourist attractions, took photos, and engaged in casual conversations with strangers. It was all carefully orchestrated so that later no one would suspect there had been any hostility between them. In the early hours of June 30th, 2009, two vehicles, a Nissan Sentra and a Lexus RX, left the Kingston East Motel and headed toward the Kingston Mills Locks. Inside the Nissan Sentra were Zab, Sahar, Jiddy, and Rona. The exact driver at that moment remains unknown, but it was most likely Zab, as she was the eldest and had a driver's license. They were being followed at a short distance by Mohammed Shafia, Tuba, and their son Hamid in the Lexus RX. What happened next would shock the world. They kept enough space between the vehicles to avoid drawing suspicion. When the Nissan Sentra parked near the Kingston Mills Locks, Mohammed Shafia stepped out of his car and approached the Nissan. Zab either willingly moved from the driver's seat or was forced to get out. Tuba then took the wheel, staying inside with the victims. Seeing their mother beside them, the girls felt no immediate danger. Meanwhile, Mohammed and Hamid returned to the Lexus and drove to a nearby motel to create the illusion that the family was simply stopping for the night before continuing their trip. At the motel, they woke the manager and rented 2 rooms. But their responses about the number of guests were inconsistent. They couldn't seem to agree if there were 6 or 9 people in their group. This raised suspicions. After dropping off the 3 youngest family members, Mohammed and Hamid got back into the Lexus and returned to the locks. As soon as Tuba saw their headlights in the darkness, she quickly got out of the Nissan and ran toward them. That was the signal. The time had come. At this point, the women inside the car were still alive, unaware they were trapped in a deadly situation. What happened next could only be partially reconstructed during the investigation. It's unclear whether the victims were harmed inside the car or outside of it. However, forensic evidence revealed crucial details. 3 of them, Rona, Jiddy, and Zab, had sustained head injuries, likely inflicted to render them before they were submerged. Sahar, however, appeared to have resisted. There were no signs of head trauma on her body, suggesting she may have remained conscious longer than the others. One by one, the victims were either drowned in the water or placed back inside the Nissan after losing consciousness. Their bodies were repositioned, and the front seats were reclined to accommodate them. At this stage, Mohammed, Tuba, and Hamid began staging the scene to make it appear like a tragic accident. Their plan was to send the vehicle into the water, making it seem as if it had rolled in by mistake. One of them started the engine, shifted the car into neutral, and exited, expecting the Nissan to roll into the canal on its own. But something went wrong. The car got stuck on the edge of the concrete ledge. The front wheels had gone over, but instead of plunging into the water, the vehicle remained suspended, teetering on the edge. This was a major setback. If anyone had appeared at that moment, they would have been caught at the scene. One of them reached through the open driver's window and turned off the ignition. The plan was unraveling, but they weren't done yet, where one would typically drive. It was an isolated area, far from the usual route someone fleeing would take. The idea that the women had chosen this remote spot in the middle of the night to escape made little sense. Then there was the damage to the Nissan Sentra. Investigators noted that the rear of the vehicle had sustained a strong impact, something unlikely in a simple accident. Fragments of a shattered headlight were found nearby, suggesting another vehicle had been involved. Additionally, the physical state of the victims raised suspicions. The absence of seatbelts and the lack of any broken windows or open doors suggested that none of the women had tried to escape. If they had been conscious when the car entered the water, it was expected that they would have struggled. But there were no signs of this. When the police took a closer look at the family's behavior, more inconsistencies emerged. Mohammed Shafia, Tuba, and Hamed seemed oddly composed for people who had just lost 4 family members. Their story also kept changing. At times, they implied the women had run away voluntarily. At other times, they suggested it was an accident. The suspicions deepened when authorities reviewed the motel's security footage. The footage showed that Mohammed and Hamed had left the motel in the middle of the night, only to return hours later, just around the time of the supposed accident. Further investigation revealed another damning piece of evidence: wiretapped conversations between Mohammed, Tuba, and Hamed. In these recordings, Mohammed spoke of his daughters bringing shame to the family and stated that he had no regrets about what had happened. In one chilling conversation, he declared that, "Even if they come back to life 100 times, I will do it again." These words erased any doubt. This was no accident. It was a calculated crime and honor killing. With mounting evidence against them, the 3 family members were arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The trial that followed became one of the most infamous in Canadian history, exposing the dark reality of honor-based violence and sending shockwaves through the nation. Justice was finally served when, in 2012, Mohammed Shafia, Tuba Yehia, and Hamed Shafia were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The deaths of Zainab, Sahar, Jiddy, and Rona were a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers faced by those who dare to defy oppressive traditions. Their tragic fate sparked widespread discussions about the need for stronger protections for women at risk of honor-based violence. Though their lives were cruelly taken, their story would not be forgotten. It became a symbol of the fight for freedom, justice, and the right of every woman to live without fear. Captured chilling conversations between Mohammed Shafia, Tuba Yehia, and their son, Hamed. They spoke openly about honor, shame, and punishment. Mohammed repeatedly expressed his anger toward his daughters, stating that they had dishonored the family and that their deaths were justified. In one of the most damning recordings, he declared, "Even if they come back to life 100 times, I will do it again." Tuba, instead of mourning the loss of her daughters, was heard supporting her husband's views. Hamed also participated in the discussions, showing no remorse for what had happened. These recordings left no doubt this was an honor killing, a cold and calculated act meant to restore the family's reputation. Armed with forensic evidence, contradictory statements, and wiretap recordings, authorities arrested Mohammed Shafia, Tuba Yehia, and Hamed Shafia. They were charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile cases in Canadian history. The prosecution presented a compelling case, exposing the family's deep-rooted beliefs and their obsession with control. Witnesses testified about the abuse and oppression the victims had endured, painting a tragic picture of lives cut short by rigid cultural expectations. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty. Mohammed Shafia, Tuba Yehia, and Hamed Shafia were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The case sent shockwaves throughout Canada and beyond, sparking discussions about honor-based violence and the urgent need to protect vulnerable individuals from family abuse. While justice was served, nothing could bring back Zainab, Sahar, Geethi, and Rona, for women whose only crime was wanting to live freely. Their story became a symbol of resistance against oppression, a reminder that no one should ever have to choose between family and freedom. Though their lives were stolen, their voices would never be silenced. Story 5. Abigail Abby Maria Hernandez was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, along the banks of the Merrimack River. She was the youngest of 2 daughters born to Ruben and Xenia Hernandez, and shared a close bond with her older sister, Sarah. Abby's mother worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her father was a sales agent. The Hernandez family was generally happy, strong, and financially stable. However, during Abby's middle school years, her parents decided to divorce. Shortly after the separation, her father remarried and began a new family. The daughters from Ruben's first marriage continued to live with their mother after the divorce. Although Ruben still provided financial support, his relationship with Abby and Sarah dwindled to occasional birthday and Christmas greetings. From a young age, Abby was an active, curious, and social child. She had a wide circle of friends and was constantly exploring new hobbies and activities. Abby played sports, excelled as an artist, enjoyed photography, loved to read, and had a knack for picking up foreign languages effortlessly. At around 12 years old, Abby joined a local outdoor club where she developed a passion for camping, hiking, and the natural world. She fell in love with the mountains and became skilled in wilderness survival, applying these lessons during various adventures. Growing up in New Hampshire, a state known for its breathtaking natural beauty with forests, mountains, and rivers, Abby thrived in an environment that attracts adventurers and nature enthusiasts from across the country. Her classmates described her as brave, intelligent, friendly, and determined, a girl with the rare ability to easily connect with everyone around her. Abby was the kind of person who could effortlessly engage in a conversation about almost any topic. She thrived on challenges and had a natural ability to spread positivity wherever she went. Restless and full of energy, she was always on the move, making plans and envisioning an exciting future for herself. The summer of 2013 was a whirlwind of activity for Abby. When she returned to school in September, she eagerly shared stories about her summer adventures, where she had been, what she had experienced, and all the exciting things she had accomplished. By this time, 14-year-old Abby had started dating Jimmy, a boy from her school who was a year older. Her mom, Xenia, was aware of the relationship and approved of her daughter seeing him. In early October 2013, with fall break and her 15th birthday approaching, Abby was busy preparing for a hiking trip with her outdoor club. She had received a brand new pair of hiking boots as a gift, but since they were a bit snug, she decided to break them in by wearing them to school. On October 9th, Abby left for school like any other day. After classes, she planned to take a walk through a nearby park and had assured her mom that she wouldn't be out late. However, by 5 p.m., when Abby still hadn't returned home, Xenia became concerned. She tried calling her daughter, only to find that Abby's phone was turned off. Trying to stay calm, Xenia assumed her daughter's phone had died and that she was likely with friends. As the hours passed with no word from Abby, Xenia's worry grew. She started calling Abby's friends and teachers, desperate for information about her daughter's whereabouts. The school confirmed that Abby had left immediately after classes ended and had waved goodbye to her friends at the bus stop. Instead of boarding the bus, however, Abby had chosen to walk home. None of her friends had seen her since, and she hadn't visited anyone's house or made any calls. Even Jimmy was unable to contact her, despite their plans to meet later that day. Frightened, Xenia, along with Abby's older sister Sarah, wasted no time and headed to the police station to report her missing. Since Abby was a minor, law enforcement immediately launched a search to find her. Investigators determined that the last signal from Abby's cell phone was picked up approximately a mile from her home. News of the missing high school student quickly spread across social media. Flyers featuring Abby's photo, a description of her clothing, and a contact number for tips were distributed within hours. By the next morning, her story was featured on the 7 a.m. news, urging anyone with information to come forward. Hundreds of people, including police officers, volunteers, and concerned citizens, joined the search for the 14-year-old. They combed through parks, empty lots, wooded areas, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings. Law enforcement followed leads, sought potential witnesses, and interviewed Abby's friends and family. But every effort led to a dead end. Detectives began their investigation by exploring whether Abby had any enemies, unresolved grudges, or even a persistent admirer. However, everyone who knew her insisted that Abby was a warm, friendly, and kind-hearted person who avoided conflicts. She was well-liked and had no known adversaries or incidents of harassment. One of the first people interviewed was Abby's boyfriend, Jimmy, who initially became the prime suspect. Detectives questioned him about their relationship, asking if they had argued, if he had any reason to be upset with her, or if he could have had a motive to harm her. Jimmy, visibly shocked and confused, denied any involvement and couldn't understand why he was under suspicion. Jimmy had a solid alibi for the time Abby went missing, corroborated by his family, teachers, and about a dozen friends. On the day Abby disappeared, Jimmy's schedule was packed with school, sports practice, rehearsals for a school band performance, and his grandfather's birthday party, all of which he attended without missing a beat. He fully cooperated with the investigation and shared everything he knew, but his alibi left no room for doubt. Despite these efforts, the case went cold. It was as if Abby had vanished into thin air. Months of searching yielded no clues or leads, and detectives realized the likelihood of finding her alive was decreasing. Nevertheless, Abby's family refused to give up hope. A month and a half after Abby's disappearance, her mother discovered an unusual letter in the mailbox. The letter was from Abby. In it, she apologized for what she had done, assured her family that she was safe and healthy, and expressed her love for her mom and sister, Sarah. However, she didn't disclose her location or the reason for her disappearance. The letter ended with a cryptic and puzzling phrase, "Dreams come true." Handwriting analysis confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby and dated to early November, strongly indicating that she was still alive. But where could she be, and why couldn't she explain her situation? Was she frightened, or had someone coerced her into writing the letter? This discovery gave rise to a new theory. Perhaps Abby had voluntarily run away, but after seeing media coverage of her disappearance, decided to let her family know she was okay. Still, the circumstances remained unclear, leaving investigators and her loved ones with more questions than answers. There was speculation that Abby might have been pregnant and had run away with the baby's father, fearing her family's anger and societal judgment. However, the Hernandez family strongly refuted this theory. Abby's older sister, Sarah, was particularly upset, stating that if Abby had been pregnant, she would have been the first to know. The sisters were extremely close and kept no secrets from each other. Additionally, Abby's only boyfriend was Jimmy, and he insisted they had not been intimate. Both were still virgins, a claim supported by Abby's friends, who confirmed that she had never dated anyone else or shown interest in another romantic relationship. Her best friend, Miranda, also dismissed the idea, emphasizing that Abby would never have caused so much pain to her mom and sister by running away. Furthermore, all of Abby's personal belongings, her documents, savings, and valuables, remained at home, casting doubt on the runaway theory. Investigators carefully analyzed Abby's letter, searching for hidden messages or clues to her location, but found none. Despite this, the FBI stepped in, classifying the case as an abduction. They believed Abby had written the letter under duress, with no opportunity to disclose her location. Their assumption proved correct. Abby and her kidnapper were just a few dozen miles away from her family home. What made the situation even more unsettling was that police had visited the kidnapper's residence multiple times since Abby's disappearance but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, the abductor grew increasingly paranoid and desperate, trying to decide what to do with his captive. Now it's time to introduce the man behind the crime, Nathaniel Nate Kibbe. Born on July 15, 1980, in the same town as Abby, there is little reliable information about his family. Some sources suggest he was raised solely by his mother and never knew his biological father. As a child, Nate was notorious for being a troublemaker, a bully, and the type of kid everyone avoided. He frequently got into fights and created problems, even keeping a list of people he disliked, individuals he planned to harm. His aggressive and cruel behavior made him an outcast among peers and a challenge for his teachers. As a teenager, Nate frequently came into contact with the police for various offenses. He joined a gang and developed a fascination with firearms, gaining extensive knowledge about them. Over the years, he faced legal troubles for assault, causing serious injuries, illegal possession of substances, and petty theft. Despite his troubling behavior, he often received only minor punishments. Interestingly, Nate had attended the same high school as Abby, but their paths never crossed due to their 18-year age gap. After graduating, he appeared to attempt to turn his life around, securing a job at a local business. Initially, his coworkers and supervisors had positive impressions of him. However, after a severe conflict at work, Nate quit his job, moved to the suburbs, and settled in a trailer park in a struggling neighborhood. Neighbors described him as odd, erratic, and aggressive. They avoided him as much as possible. By 2011, already in his 30s, Kibbe had begun a relationship and even lived with a younger girl. This relationship hinted at the dark and troubling behavior he would later reveal. Chuang Td Duancher was from a dysfunctional family, ran away from home, and moved into the adult man's trailer. Remarkably, Nate didn't even try to hide their relationship, openly introducing her as his girlfriend. In the spring of 2013, Nate attempted his first known kidnapping, but failed. He attacked a 15-year-old schoolgirl at a bus stop near her school, trying to force her into his car. Despite the victim's testimony and multiple witnesses, the case was inexplicably closed, and it never went to trial. Authorities didn't view him as a serious threat, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Let's return to the day of Abigail Hernandez's disappearance, October 9, 2013. As her 15th birthday approached, Abby had received a pair of hiking boots as a gift. Although they were slightly too tight, she decided to break them in by wearing them to school. By the end of the day, she regretted her choice. Her feet were sore, each step increasingly painful, but she was determined to walk home. The journey was long, and as she limped along the road, an old pickup truck pulled up beside her. Behind the wheel was Nathaniel Kibbe. The man smiled warmly and offered her a ride, saying he could drop her off wherever she needed to go. Abby politely declined, but Nate wasn't discouraged. He continued driving slowly alongside her, observing her limp. Noticing her discomfort, he asked what had happened. Abby sighed and admitted that her new boots were giving her blisters. Hearing this, Nate swung open the passenger door and gestured for her to hop in. After a brief moment of hesitation, Abby accepted. She reasoned that this kind, smiling man couldn't possibly pose any danger. Unfortunately, she couldn't have been more wrong. As they drove, Nate struck up a friendly conversation to put Abby at ease. He asked questions, cracked jokes, and acted like a good Samaritan. Abby felt safe enough to answer his questions and even laugh at his jokes. At one point, Nate casually mentioned needing to stop by a hardware store to pick up some tools for a repair job. He pulled into a dark, secluded parking lot, and Abby's unease grew. She told him that her house wasn't far from there and that she could walk the rest of the way. Noticing the shift in her tone and the nervous expression on her face, Nate's demeanor changed. As Abby reached to unbuckle her seat and escape, Nate acted swiftly. Anticipating her move, he grabbed her clothes with one hand and, with the other, pulled a gun from the glove compartment. Abby's instincts were correct. This wasn't a kind stranger. It was the beginning of a nightmare. He pointed the gun directly at Abby's face and threatened to kill her if she resisted. The attacker then tied her hands and feet with zip ties and placed a baseball cap on her head, angling it to block her view of their route. However, when he noticed Abby attempting to shift the cap to see the road, he became enraged. Without hesitation, he pulled out a stun gun and shocked her until she lost consciousness. Abby woke up in a stifling, windowless space. She quickly realized she was inside a small shipping container that Nathaniel owned and had hidden behind some trees in the trailer park. Shortly after, Nate appeared with duct tape and a motorcycle helmet. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, placed the helmet on her head, and ensured she was completely immobilized. Then, stripping her of her dignity and humanity, he assaulted her. From that moment on, Nate subjected Abby to near daily physical and psychological abuse, using her to fulfill his twisted fantasies. He constantly threatened to harm her family if she tried to escape or call for help. At the same time, he dangled false hope, promising to release her if she behaved and didn't resist. During the first few days, Abby was in a state of shock, preparing herself for the worst. Over time, she realized her captor wasn't planning to kill her, at least not yet. Determined to survive, she devised a plan to emotionally connect with him. She told him she didn't judge him, that everyone makes mistakes, and that she wouldn't go to the police if he let her go. But Nate was dangerously unpredictable. The smallest word or action could set him off, turning him into a violent monster. While he occasionally displayed twisted moments of tenderness, his brutality was relentless. About a month into her captivity, Nate began allowing Abby into his trailer for short periods. She was permitted to take showers and even watch TV with through the news. They saw the intense search efforts underway to find her. This prompted Nate to force Abby to write a letter to her mother, aiming to convince her family she was safe and to halt the search operation. Under Nate's dictation, Abigail wrote several letters. Each time, she tried to sneak in a clue about her location, but Nate was quick to notice and severely punished her. Realizing the danger, she began complying fully with his instructions to avoid provoking his wrath. 6 months into her ordeal, Nate began trusting Abby enough to allow her to help with his counterfeit money operation. Sometimes, he let her sleep in the trailer and even permitted her to cook meals. Despite these small freedoms, he remained as abusive and controlling as ever. He forced her to call him master and never revealed his real name. Over time, Abby built a tenuous rapport with her captor, subtly gaining his trust. He occasionally brought her books and magazines at her request. One day, as she flipped through a magazine, she came across the name Nathaniel Kibbe. Though it seemed like a breakthrough, she wasn't certain if it was truly her captor's name. This small clue became a flicker of hope in her grim existence, motivating Abby to keep fighting for her survival. Deciding to take a risky gamble, Abigail one day addressed her captor by the name she had discovered, Nathaniel, waiting anxiously for his reaction. He merely rolled his eyes, sighed, and asked calmly how she had learned it. Abby admitted she had seen the name in one of the books he had given her. Nate smirked but said nothing, leaving her unsure whether she had made any progress. Since Abby spent most of her time confined in the soundproof container, she had no idea how close help had come. Unbeknownst to her, the police had once been just feet away, though they weren't looking for her. Nate had been caught up in another illegal activity, this time illegal possession of a firearm. Attempting to avoid serious consequences, he cooperated with law enforcement and confessed to the charge. Armed with a search warrant, the police inspected Nate's trailer thoroughly. However, they failed to consider the container hidden nearby. No one thought to open it, despite the grim truth of what lay inside. Nate escaped with nothing more than a fine and the confiscation of his weapon. Having narrowly avoided exposure, Nate must have felt untouchable. Even after all the horrible things he had done, the law seemed to favor him. He had no plans to release Abby. She had become just another part of his twisted routine. In July 2014, Nate met a woman named Lorraine at a bar. After chatting briefly, he brought her back to his trailer, where they became intimate. During their time together, Lorraine confided in him about her financial troubles, lamenting that she couldn't even afford to pay her rent. As she prepared to leave, Nate handed her 2 $50 bills. Lorraine accepted them and left, but her gratitude quickly turned to fury. The next day, she called Nate, enraged, to tell him that the bills were counterfeit. She yelled that she had already contacted the police and reported where she had gotten the fake money. She warned him that law enforcement would soon return with another search warrant. What Lorraine didn't realize was that her phone call would change Abby's life forever. On July 20th, 2014, Nate did something unexpected. He handed Abby all of her personal belongings, tied her hands, sat her in the passenger seat of his car, and covered her face with a baseball cap. Abby had no idea what was happening, but feared the worst. She thought he was taking her to kill her. After driving for some time, Nate pulled over on a deserted country road. To Abby's astonishment, he untied her hands, ordered her out of the car, and told her not to go to the police. Before she could process what was happening, he sped away. Stunned and disoriented, Abby wandered along the road until she saw a sign that told her she wasn't far from home. Overwhelmed with disbelief and fear, she walked for hours, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that Nate might return to recapture her. Finally, Abby arrived at her family's home. A surveillance camera at the front door recorded the moment she walked in. Inside, she heard her mother talking to someone on the phone. Summoning all her strength, she called out loudly, "Mom." Her mother turned, stunned and overjoyed to see her daughter safe and alive. Abby had finally escaped the nightmare and returned to the embrace of her family. Her mother dropped the phone in shock and ran to the door, embracing Abby tightly. They held each other for a long time, sobbing, unable to believe the nightmare was finally over. Abby noticed how much her mother's appearance had changed. She looked older, worn down from months of relentless worry and despair. Xenia, overwhelmed with relief, began asking Abby where she had been and what had happened, insisting they go to the police immediately. But Abby, still haunted by Nate's threats, refused to reveal the truth. She lied, claiming she didn't know who had taken her or where she had been held. Even at the police station, she remained tight-lipped, terrified that Nate might come after her family if she spoke out. For a week, Abby struggled with her emotions and thoughts. She desperately wanted to feel safe again, but was unsure if exposing her captor was worth the risk. Finally, she decided to confide in her mother. Through tears, Abby revealed everything: his name, the details of her captivity, and the horrors she endured. Xenia listened intently and then gently convinced Abby to go back to the police. She reasoned that the man who had inflicted so much pain needed to face justice and that their family could never truly feel safe while he was free. On July 27, 2014, Abigail provided the police with Nate Kibbe's name, as well as the make and license plate of his car. The following day, Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested. To everyone's surprise, he offered no resistance, though he adamantly denied any involvement in the crime. When authorities searched Kibbe's trailer and the container, finally inspecting the space where Abby had been held, they found overwhelming evidence. The discovery included her hair, traces of blood and sweat, and even broken fingernails, confirming her months of captivity and abuse. Despite the undeniable evidence, Kibbe's lawyer filed a motion in August to have him released on bail. Shockingly, the judge approved the request, prompting public outrage. However, a strict no-contact order was immediately issued prohibiting Kibbe from approaching or communicating with any members of the Hernandez family. The trial began in December 2014 and stretched until May 2016. Facing overwhelming evidence and hoping for a lighter sentence, Kibbe agreed to a plea deal, admitting his guilt. He was sentenced to 90 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Abigail spoke in court during the sentencing, delivering a statement that left the room in awe. She said she forgave her captor, explaining that the ordeal taught her to cherish her life and every moment with her loved ones even more deeply. Her mother, Xenia, also took the stand. Her voice trembling, she expressed her hatred for Kibbe, but admitted a small measure of gratitude that he had spared her daughter's life, allowing her to return home. Abby's courage and resilience inspired many, turning a story of unimaginable darkness into one of hope and healing. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.